It's like, um, when you think about the name Nazorean, most people immediately picture a little village in Galilee, right? But what if it wasn't about geography at all?
That's exactly the twist here. It makes you wonder if the label Nazorean was more a badge of identity than an indication of where someone was really from.
Absolutely. Instead of the story being rooted in an actual hometown, the term might have been a marker for a secret sect, one that emphasized a vow of separation and radical consecration.
Right, it's like, the idea that Jesus wasn't actually from Nazareth in the traditional sense, but was instead a member of a group that saw itself as distinctly separate, even sacred, in how it lived.
Exactly. Picture
Yeah,
this: a movement that valued a kind of extreme dedication to holiness, drawing on ideas similar to the Nazirite vow from Numbers 6. Though, interestingly, Jesus' behavior doesn't exactly line up with a typical Nazirite lifestyle.
true. It's paradoxical. I mean, here we have someone who openly drinks wine and engages with the people, practices that wouldn't really fit with the traditional Nazarite restrictions, like no wine or cutting hair.
Yeah. It's like on one hand, the term Nazorean could refer to a vow or a certain separation from a corrupted world. And on the other hand, the lifestyle we see in the Gospels doesn't tick every single box of those ancient rules.
Hmm. It really makes you rethink what the label was meant to convey. Was it about ritual purity, or was it instead a marker to highlight a completely different kind of radical commitment?
Right. And if you dig into the texts, there's this clear distinction in the Greek. The Gospels actually use two different terms, Nazōraios and Nazarēnos. One seems to signify a geographical origin and the other a kind of sectarian identity. It's
Yeah,
perplexing because those differences suggest a more layered meaning behind the title.
it's almost as if the gospel writers were trying to retroactively create a prophecy that fit the narrative they wanted to promote, isn't it?
Right. Think about Matthew's writing. He even claims he shall be called a Nazōraios, as if that fulfills a prophecy, even though we can't directly pinpoint a verse in the Hebrew scriptures that says just that.
Yeah, and that leads us to question, is Matthew really quoting an old prophecy, or is he reshaping the narrative to support a shifting identity for Jesus?
Exactly. And one of the fascinating angles here is the historical and archaeological evidence. Nazareth as a town is barely mentioned in early historical texts. The famous historian Josephus, for instance, lists every town in Galilee but doesn't mention Nazareth at all.
That's a major point. Without clear historical records or detailed archaeological evidence, isn't it possible that Nazareth was more of a mythologized setting than a real urban center at the time?
Sure, and even the archaeological digs are pulling us in different directions. There was that early Roman house discovered in 2009, right beneath modern Nazareth. Some scholars, like Ken Dark, even speculated it might have been Jesus'
Yeah,
boyhood home. But then, critics argue that the evidence just doesn't support a settled town until after 70 CE.
that's a tough nut to crack. On one hand, you have evidence that almost hints at a historical settlement, and on the other, you have strong arguments that challenge its existence during Jesus' lifetime.
Right, and this is where the linguistic nuance really matters. The use of Nazorean in Acts 24:5 when referring to Paul, calling him a leader of the sect of the Nazoreans, suggests that early on people recognized this group not by their physical location but by a set of beliefs and practices.
I guess it paints the picture of an early Christian community that was quite insular and distinct from mainstream Jews and later Gentile Christians.
Exactly. These Nazoreans, as described by early church fathers like Epiphanius, held on to Jewish traditions while they embraced the new message about Jesus. They even kept kosher and observed the Sabbath.
Yeah,
It seems they stood at a fascinating crossroads between two worlds.
that makes me wonder, though, if they were so distinct, why do we still often equate Jesus solely with Nazareth? Isn't it like we're overlooking this broader, richer identity?
Right. Well, that's the kingdom of retroactive storytelling. Over centuries, the mainstream narrative got streamlined. Instead of presenting Jesus as the leader of a diverse, living movement, the focus shifted purely to him being from Nazareth. This geographic fixity, you might say, conveniently explained away the complexities of his original identity.
Mm-hmm. It's a bit like repackaging an eclectic indie band with a slick pop image. The original spirit gets lost in the process, right?
Exactly. It's like, the narrative was refined to make the story easier to sell and understand. The early proponents and outsiders recognized his group as a kind of holy sect, a ragtag band of Torah-keeping Christians who were set apart from both the Roman establishment and the temple authorities.
I get that. But here's one thing that puzzles me. If Jesus clearly wasn't living by strict Nazirite rules, allowing wine, touching the dead, and all that, how do we justify calling him a Nazorean in this context? Isn't that a bit contradictory?
That's a great point, and it's a subtle tension in the argument. While Jesus' behavior doesn't align with the original Nazarite vow, the label may have evolved. By the 1st century, Nazorean came to be understood as a broader marker of separation, a symbol of being set apart from a world considered impure or corrupted.
Right.
It wasn't about following a rigid set of rules anymore, but more about embodying an alternative way of life.
So in a sense, the term transformed over time. It wasn't just about ritual purity. It was about a manifesto of counterculture.
Exactly. Well, you could even say it was a badge of honor for those rejecting the dominant religious and political systems of the day. You had people like the Nazoreans, Jewish Christians who still clung to the law of Moses while also embracing Jesus as the Messiah. That complexity really opens up a whole new way of seeing the origins of early Christianity.
That reminds me of the Nazareth inscription. How does that play into this narrative?
Oh yeah. The Nazareth inscription has always been such a tantalizing piece. It's a marble edict, originally thought to support the idea of Jesus' empty tomb by warning against disturbing graves. But, chemical analysis revealed it actually came from a Greek island rather than Galilee.
Exactly.
So that piece of evidence turns out to be more about misinterpretation than fact.
And that just shows how sometimes the hunger for comforting evidence or neat narratives can lead us astray.
Right on. It's almost as if the traditional story was reshaped to make everything neat. The maps, the stained glass windows, even the Christmas pageant lore. But the real picture might be a lot messier and, more intriguing.
It brings a whole new dimension to how we view the birth and identity of Jesus. No longer is he just the carpenter's son from a specific town. Instead, he's emerging as a symbol of boundary breaking, a radical figure set apart from his times.
Exactly. And that's where the true explosive implications lie. If we accept that Nazorean was originally a sectarian badge rather than just a geographical tag, then the core of Jesus' identity and the identity of his earliest followers is transformed. It implies that the early movement wasn't rooted in a small town, but in a radical call to live differently.
So, in a way, this reinterpretation challenges our conventional image of Jesus, doesn't it? It shifts our focus from his humble geographical origins to his role as a radical leader of a countercultural movement.
Definitely. It not only redefines how we understand the early Christian movement, but also forces us to reconsider how prophecy was crafted and utilized. For instance, when Matthew writes about Jesus fulfilling a prophecy by being called a Nazōraios, it might have been less about predicting a birthplace and more about establishing a new identity that merged sanctity with rebellion.
And isn't it interesting how that label persisted? Even in Acts, Paul is identified with the Nazoreans, which tells us that external observers saw the movement as something fundamentally different from mainstream Jewish or Roman society.
Right? And church fathers like Jerome even interacted with members of the Nazorean community, consulting with them on Hebrew interpretations of Scripture.
Yeah.
It shows that this wasn't a fringe idea. It had a significant influence for centuries.
But here's where I still struggle a bit. Don't you think there's a risk in overemphasizing the sectarian aspect? Could it be that in trying to decode these labels, we might lose sight of the broader, almost universal aspects of Jesus' teachings?
That's a fair critique. It's important to balance both views. While the sectarian and identity aspects open a fresh lens on his historical context, they coexist with the universal appeal of his message. The challenge is, well,
Right.
not to let one narrative completely overshadow the other. It's a balancing act between historical specificity and universal themes.
Mm-hmm. And that tension is what makes this whole field so fascinating, isn't it? The more we dig, the more layers we find.
Exactly. It's like peeling back an onion. Each layer reveals new complexities, from archaeological debates to nuanced linguistic differences, and even to the reinterpretation of prophecies.
Yeah,
And that, in its own way, enriches our understanding of who Jesus was and what his movement truly represented.
truly, it turns the simple story of a village carpenter into, a complex tale of identity, faith, and radical separation. It's a perspective that really challenges conventional narratives in a respectful yet provocative way.
Absolutely. And whether you're drawn into the historical debates, the linguistic puzzles, or the archaeological mysteries, it's all a reminder that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems. It invites us to keep questioning and exploring.